An entitled Karen breaks open the doors of an ambulance and prevents a patient from getting life-threatening care for such an unimportant, non-life-threatening reason. It doesn't end well for her. Here's what happened. So, this just happened last night, and I still can't believe someone would do this. I'm a 30-year-old paramedic, and I've been in EMS for the past 8 years, and I absolutely love my job. Last night, we were dispatched to a 75-year-old female who fell at home. The patient stated that she tripped over her carpet and hit her head when she fell. We arrived on the scene and noticed that the home was a duplex with our patient's door on the right and her neighbor's door on the left. We made our way into the home and found her lying on the floor. The woman was awake and breathing. We started asking her the standard questions. Are you okay? Does anything hurt? Do you remember the fall? She stated that she has a pounding headache and that she remembers walking to bed and then waking up on the floor. In my field, that's a pretty big red flag. We noticed that she's got a pretty good lump on the side of her head and a big bruise starting to form already. Noticing the bruise, I asked her if she was on any blood thinners. She said that she was on blood thinners for a previous stroke she had a few years ago. We urged her to let us take her to the hospital because there was a possibility that the fall could have caused a bleed in her brain and she should go to the hospital to get some scans done. She agrees, and we begin to package her up. We applied a C-collar around her neck in case of any spine neck injuries. She denied any neck or back pain, so we lifted her up and placed her on our stair chair. A stair chair is exactly what it sounds like. It's a chair with tracks that we use to carry patients up and down stairs. As we were getting her out of the house, her neighbor whipped the door open and started yelling about how she couldn't sleep with all the lights and noises outside. The sound of the stair chair apparently woke her up, and she was not happy about that. My lieutenant walked over to her and apologized and said that we were dealing with a medical emergency and that we would be leaving soon enough. The Karen neighbor then noticed that our patient was her neighbor, and that's when she started yelling about something totally different. The entitled neighbor started yelling, "You can't take her to the hospital! I have errands to run tomorrow and she needs to watch my kids!" My lieutenant again reiterated that we were here for a medical emergency and that her health is more important than her errands. The entitled neighbor let out a loud huff and then slammed the door in his face. We thought that was the end of it. We were wrong. After a few minutes in the back of the ambulance, we told our lieutenant that he could take the engine crew back to the station and that we were going to be heading out in a few minutes. After we checked her vitals, got an IV going, and started giving her IV fluids, my partner got out of the back and went up to the driver's seat. About 5 seconds later, the back doors of my ambulance fly open, and who do I see? The entitled neighbor, of course. Apparently, she needed a few minutes to get dressed before coming outside. I yell at her, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She yells back, "I told you that she can't go to the hospital because she has to watch my kids tomorrow." She then starts trying to pull the cot out of the ambulance with our patient on it. Luckily, she didn't know how to unlatch the cot and couldn't get her out. Our patient says, "I can't watch your kids tomorrow because I fell and I might be having a stroke." The entitled neighbor yells back at her and says, "You're fine. You don't need to go to the hospital because you're not having a stroke." My partner then hears the commotion and goes to the back of the ambulance. He pulls her off the cot, and I slam and lock the doors. You could tell that the entitled neighbor was about to become combative. It's important to know that either the police department or the sheriff's department responds to our calls too, when it's at night. Because of where we were, it took a few minutes for the sheriff's department to show up on scene, but he got there just in time. I couldn't hear much through the door, but I saw the officer get out of HOS Cruiser with his taser drawn. My partner runs back up to the driver's seat and starts heading to the hospital. The last thing I saw through the back windows was the entitled neighbor stomping towards the officer and then her hitting the ground after being tased. Super satisfying to watch. I was talking with my patient and asked what that was all about, and she said that the entitled neighbor will just drop her 3 young kids off at her house and leave for several hours at a time with no notice. My patient had no idea that she was supposed to watch the kids at all because, again, the entitled neighbor never even gives her a heads up about these things. My contact at the hospital said that the patient does not have a bleed. She does, however, have a really nasty-looking bruise on her face from the blood thinners. It's incredibly common. She will most likely be going home soon. There is no update on the neighbor. I probably will not hear anything back until my next shift day. Wow, the poor lady. She is hardcore getting taken advantage of. My parents are of that age, and I don't even let them watch my one child without me present, because I don't want anything to happen and I don't want to wear them out. This poor lady needs to run away from this crazy neighbor. That's probably abuse. Honestly, CPS should be called. If she's this bad of a neighbor, it makes me wonder how bad she treats her kids. So this next story is revenge-worthy. It's titled, When Someone Tried to Get You Fired, But You Have the Uno reverse card. At the time of this incident, I was working as a manager in a mid-sized business. While I was there, I was assigned a new member to my team. I'll call her Evil. Evil was in her mid-20s and was pretty fresh out of college. She was the kind of person who could talk your ear off about all of her ideas and plans and what she was working on, but never really seemed to have anything to show for it. When I talked to her about clients complaining that she wasn't getting back to them, she would always have an excuse about how difficult they were, how snowed under she was, and how she had written an email but it must have gotten lost in spam, and so on and so forth. Basically never her fault. It got to the point where after one of our monthly meetings, I called her in and explained that if she couldn't get her tasks done, she needed to let us know so we could help delegate resources to make sure things weren't slipping through the cracks. I'll admit, I was pretty direct. Her performance was impacting the whole team, and my job was literally to keep the team on track. I get that people can be under pressure, that there can be stuff going on at home which impacts work, and that sometimes people need a bit of help. But if every time I ask about a project, you say, yep, everything's good, I've got it under control, and then it all falls apart and your only response is to blame the client, we have a problem. I explained that I wasn't going to start formal performance management or anything like that, but from now on, I'd like her to check in with me on Monday mornings for 10 minutes to go over objectives for the week and to check if she needed support with any of her clients. I know it isn't fun to be micromanaged, so I tried to keep these check-ins short and mostly just offer assistance on stuff. She clearly hated my guts though, and apparently was hatching her own pro-revenge. Now part of my role included use of a purchasing card, which wasn't in my name, but I had access to. I was given the card to basically make small purchases for the office or spend up to $500 on clients. The card was kept in an office I shared with another team manager, where we both could access it when we needed it. One day, I get a call from accounts asking about a few abnormal purchases on the card. A Photoshop subscription, a couple of Uber Eats orders, an HBO subscription, etc. I say I don't know anything about them and they should check with the other team manager. Apparently, the other team manager didn't know anything about them either, because after the weekend, I get called into the big boss's office. After my colleague and I had denied involvement, accounts had started calling Adobe and Uber and stuff to find out where the transactions were coming from. They said that not only were the accounts in my name, they were registered to an email address with my name in it too, e.g. Word, roll3@domain.com or something. I can't describe what it felt like to be in that meeting. I felt physically sick. I couldn't work out what was happening. I was so shocked I didn't know what to say. I felt like I was about to get fired and I couldn't understand how that was even possible. The director was going on about how access to the card was a privilege and that I had signed an agreement about appropriate use and so on and so forth. I denied that I had been using it inappropriately and the boss listened, but I could tell he wasn't that convinced. To be honest, in my head I was gaslighting myself and worrying that I had somehow saved the card in Google and maybe my wife had been accidentally using it or something. It was terrible, and I found myself apologizing and saying, I don't know how this happened. I assure you that I know that none of those expenses are appropriate uses of company funds. There must have been some kind of mistake. Can I please have the details and look into it? Etc. Etc. When I finally got out of that office, still intact, barely, Evil was waiting for me at my office door. She was grinning from ear to ear and sweetly explained she had been waiting for our morning meeting. I told her something had come up and we'd do the meeting tomorrow, and she said, "Oh, will you be in tomorrow?" Confused, because I didn't know I was in a pro-revenge thread at the time, I just replied, "Yes, why would I not be in tomorrow?" And she just sipped her tea and said, "Oh, no reason," turned around and went back to her desk. Something felt off, but I was still worrying about what had happened with the boss, so I spent the next couple of hours calling my wife, calling Adobe, and doing the same legwork that accounts had done. It became very obvious that someone had been using my name and the company card to spend a bunch of money online. Had I been hacked or something? Personal info on the dark web, and these hackers just really wanted Photoshop and Wendy's delivered? It was the Uber Eats that was her undoing. After getting on the phone and talking through what had gone on, and obviously giving my name for the account and everything, the fellow on the phone told me where the food had been delivered. It was in our city, which made me rule out straight away any notion of my data being sold online or something. Now I was suspicious and pissed. I don't like to think the worst of people, but now I was. Listening to my gut, I pulled up Evil's employee information and checked her address. I pulled it up on Google Maps, dropped a pin on her place, and then looked for the address Uber Eats had given me. It was the corner of her effing block. I was furious. When she left work for the day, I got IT to give me access to her laptop. Sure enough, when I opened up her domain.com account, under her listed accounts was Word Roll3 at domain.com. There were some things she had been smart about. The IP address she had been using was the office, which would have tied back to me. She had even had the food delivered to a different address. She had even made a fake email address. But saving her passwords on a work computer was a mistake. I called the boss that night and explained what I had found, and kept the IT guy with me to support the fact that I hadn't just logged into her computer and made it all up. The next day, the boss called her into the office and fired her so bad there were red trucks lining up outside the building. When she teary-eyed left his office, I made sure I was standing in the hall sipping a cup of tea. It had gotten cold while I waited for her, but still tasted sweet. I hope she went home that night, because if she did, she would have received some nice goodbye Wendy's delivered by Uber Eats. Paid for on my personal card, of course. Revenge and justice can be the same thing, right? In the end, she was fired. The boss apologized, and we were on good terms when I left in October for a new gig. She never apologized, and I haven't seen her since. The boss decided not to get police involved, and neither did I. Just didn't want the hassle. This was the first pro-revenge story I've read that was written by the victim. So evil, but so satisfying at the end. My Karen teacher insists that I am lying about my mother having cancer. She ended up sucking at her job, so she decides to destroy another teacher's personal property. So I managed to get my revenge on her by forcing her to lose her job and any opportunity to find work for acting unprofessional. Here's exactly what happened. Before the story begins, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell so you can listen to more stories. This was in my grade 11 year of high school. My computer class had a year-long substitute teacher because our amazing teacher was out for a year working on a government contract. Our previous teacher was outstanding. He had 6 different classes in our classroom, all happening at the same time, which were computer repair, programming level 1, programming level 2, networking level 1, networking level 2A, and level 2B. He would give a lecture for each of the classes on a specific day of the week, programming on Monday, repair on Tuesday, and so on. We would all work in our own groups, and everything went quite well. The next year came around, and I found out that we had a sub for the year. I had 2 back-to-back blocks in this class because I was doing 2 courses. I wandered up to the class to see what kind of teacher we were dealing with, mainly interested because I was almost certain whoever they found did not have the credentials to teach at least half of those classes. The new teacher was a foreign woman that none of us have ever heard of before. For the purpose of the story, we will call her Mrs. S. I went and found my friends to tell them what I had seen. We were all optimistic cause from a very short conversation. She seemed quite informed and had a good background. It didn't last long. On the first day of class, Mrs. S introduced herself as a programming teacher who had been in school for 4 years. She went on to tell us about her programming experience in Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Access. She then told us that the programming students would not be doing the Java and C++ course we had signed up for and would instead be doing database and Excel because those are what she learned, and she said, and I quote, "They will be more useful than C and the Java." She also went on to suspend all at lunch clubs because she didn't think high school students could be trusted with computers alone. Understandably, some of us were quite upset about that, considering that we came there to program. She also did not give the repair people or the networking people any kind of support and completely stopped their lectures as well, preferring to let them figure it out themselves and self-teach without giving any of the resources to do so, and occasionally throwing out a test pre-written by the last teacher for her. This continued for about 2 weeks till one day she came in and said quite irritated that we would actually be doing the Java now unless we wanted to keep doing database, so we switched to Java, and she basically left us out to dry from there because she wasn't teaching database anymore. She came to harass people in computer repair. First, she told us the shop room was too messy and made us throw out 90% of our training workstations and equipment because they were not important in her eyes, equipment that did not belong to the school but actually belonged to the other teacher. We took home what we could steal for safekeeping, but she did end up throwing out a few thousand in equipment. Then she started imposing stupid rules on us, such as, you can't have the computer on while you are troubleshooting inside because you could electrocute yourself, or you don't need the case open to troubleshoot motherboard lights, or my personal favorite and the most scary, maybe you should change the power supply to 240 volt if you aren't getting enough power. We followed most of her stupid requests as much as we could because she threatened to lock us out of the lab room and give us only textbook work if we didn't. Needless to say, it was a challenging time. One of the students in the networking area got fed up and started doing up his own coursework and lecturing to us so that we could at least get some kind of use out of the courses. To his credit, it was all very good, but Mrs. S had the balls to force him into doing it from there on out, and then turn around and give him low grades for not getting his own work done on time. A few months of this very uneasy balance go by, and my mother comes down with colon cancer. I've already had a handful of other family members suddenly taken from me by cancer, so understandably this is a very stressful time. I was joking with my friends and trying to not break down over the whole thing. I had a very unstable laptop running Linux that would crash if looked at funny and had a horrible habit of corrupting the operating system when the battery died because the reserve shutdown sensor didn't work anymore. Battery always read 0% but would go for an hour or two. While I was working on the school desktop computer, I had a few pages open that I was taking notes in and a Facebook tab, so I could keep in contact with my mother because she was in surgery and I was waiting for her to come out. I look over and the teacher is snooping through my laptop, opening folders and closing windows, and eventually pushes the power button until it shuts down. I asked her what the hell she thought she was doing, and she responded with, "You shouldn't be on Facebook or writing notes on a personal computer during class time, especially when your grades are slipping." Really glad she brought that up in front of everyone. I snapped out and told her that doesn't give her the right to touch my stuff, and she best hope she hasn't corrupted my laptop. She told me if I keep my tone up, then I'll be in detention, so at this point, I am trying just to keep calm, because if I get too emotional, I have a tendency to explode. This is often made worse because of my mild autism. I took a second, then replied in a calmer tone. "I'm sorry, I'm just having a hard time at home right now. My mother was diagnosed with colon cancer, and I am waiting to hear back." Now, I didn't want to bring this up, but I thought my teacher would have a bit of empathy for me and leave me be. How wrong I was. She has the nerve to say, I don't look like a kid whose mother has cancer, and I need to quit making sob story excuses. It took every fiber of my body not to stand up and slap the cow right there. I gave her the dirtiest 1,000-yard stare I think I have ever done while also trying to not burst out crying. I spoke to nobody for the rest of the day till I got home. People kept asking if I was okay, and I ignored everyone. My mother was out of the hospital and home by the time I got there. I broke down crying and told her about my day. Her face was comforting, but you could see the fire of an angry woman behind her brown eyes. She told me not to worry and that it'd be okay. A few weeks passed and I was called into the office for a one-on-one parent-teacher conference someone forgot to tell me about. There were all the teachers I had that year, good and bad, my learning assistance teacher, the VP, and the principal herself. They told me that we were there to discuss my grade slippage as soon as my mother came. My mother was about 10 minutes late, leaving me to awkwardly sit with all these people. She comes in and is all smiles and apologizes for being late, letting everyone know she got held up at hospital. That's when one of the teachers asked why she was in hospital, and my mother smiled and responded she was just getting her cancer checked on. The room went cold, and her voice seemingly dripped with blood when she said it. My computers teacher went pale, and everyone in the room was giving a confused, "What on earth did you do look?" My mother proceeded to relay me coming crying home about how I was treated to everyone present while Mrs. S tried to become one with the wall of the small meeting room. She kept it short, but to paraphrase, added the following. "How dare you say something so careless to my son? I hope you are ashamed, and I hope you don't get invited back for another year." She then returned back to her normal happy self and discussed my grades like nothing happened whilst half the teachers were still trying to figure out what just happened, and told them that now she was out of the hospital, my grades should improve again. I just sat quiet the whole time and tried to suppress bursting out laughing. After that day, she never directly spoke to me again, had instructions relayed through other people, or gave them to the class as a whole. She did her damnedest to be nowhere near me and say nothing to me. My grades improved quite a bit, and the year ended with me passing. Mrs. S was previously offered a job at the school as a secondary computer teacher, but after all the trouble, the job was pulled back. The next year, when our first computer teacher returned, he was furious to learn most of his equipment and personal books had been thrown out. We returned the things that we snagged during the purge, but he still lost a few thousand in personal teaching stuff. The school paid him back with $10,000, but he says he lost so much more than that in time and preset handmade equipment. We told him all about the horror show, and he gave us all an extensive test normally given at the end of the year, which the vast majority of us failed. We ended up redoing all the computer courses from the previous year because, in his words, she didn't even teach us the basics. You really did put up with a lot. It sounds like you handled yourself very well in the face of all this adversity, and I'm proud of you for that. You're right to be proud of yourself too. There were many things you could have done differently, but I think that overall you made some very smart decisions about how to handle the situation, especially by not snapping out and lashing at your teacher when she said the most disrespectful thing she could. I don't see how a teacher can get any more unprofessional than claiming one of her students is lying about their mother having cancer just to make a sob story. I can't believe she really said that, but I'm glad that you and your mother got your revenge on the parents' evening. She had to pay for her actions, and it wouldn't be right to let her continue teaching when she clearly can't make the kids feel safe. Hope you're feeling better now with your original teacher back, and I'm wishing your mother a speedy recovery. Do you guys think the Karen teacher should have been fired? I think the answer's pretty obvious. Let me know in the comments.